to $10,000 a year.
Wow.
But I believe, while that's certainly nothing, to sneeze at, that's a lot of money. I certainly know I could I could find a lot of things to do with $10,000 a year. It's not the same as having a pension. And
Right.
I go back to what Jimmy Hutto said. I want my service time to be valued. There's another guy in Foley, Alabama. You might remember, you and your listeners might remember the expansion, Seattle Pilots. Jim Bowden, of course, wrote Ball 4 about that 1 year for that team. There was a fellow by the name of Bill Edgerton who was a pitcher for the Seattle Pilots, and he's living now in Foley, Alabama. And he basically says, look, I'm happy for the Negro Leaguers. I'm glad they got their money. But if you're saying their contributions are just as important as mine, well, they're getting paid for their contributions, and how come I'm not? And that's
right.
really, again, in a nutshell, I am not an attorney. I don't want anyone to think I am. But having researched this book as I've done, I know a little bit more about employment labor law than I did that when I started writing and researching last May. And I just think it is a absolute travesty and injustice that I think a lot of people, a lot of your listeners, it'll resonate with them. A lot of people can't understand why ball players today get the amount of money they do. Your average 9-to-5 worker, he's never going to make $27 million in his lifetime, much less the $27 million that A-Rod gets in basically 7 months. But they're accepting of it because Marvin Miller and Donald Fair, to their everlasting credit, they were, as you correctly indicated, tough negotiators, and they got these players the monies that the current salary structure, the current market sees fit to award them. But I think in the heart of every person, why this issue will resonate with people, Mike, is because we've all at one point in time in our lives, we've all felt the pain and cruelty of injustice. We've all felt that, had Breaks gone a different way, we might be an A-Rod. And I think that's a powerful, powerful thing that, as I said, will resonate with people. I think they're going to, once they read the book, hopefully they'll read the book, and once they get wind through talk shows such as yours of this issue, I think there's going to be a righteous indignation about this issue because, as you said at the outset, a lot of people just don't know about it.
Yeah, how did you find out about it? What was your story with it?
Oh, I love telling the story. I tell it in the book. I tell it in the website. I had just come off having a piece published in the Chicago Sun-Times. I was one of the last journalists to interview the late Larry Gelbart. I'm a MASH aficionado, and I did a story about Adam's Ribs, the classic MASH episode. And I was sitting on the couch with my wife, and she says, well, what are you going to do for an encore? And last year, as I'm sure your listeners and you know, last year was the 40th anniversary of the imperfect game. And to any Mets fan, especially who knows the history of the Mets, that was the night of July 9th, 1969, when Tom Seaver carried a perfect game into the ninth inning. He got Randy Hundley on a comebacker to the mound for 1 out. And then the number 8 place hitter, a little-known rookie, a converted shortstop named Jimmy Qualls, lined a clean single between Cleon Jones and the late Tommy Agee, and the perfect game was spoiled. And I had done a little reading about Jimmy Qualls and Tom Seaver, and I thought it was a remarkable contrast, a remarkable parallel of David and Goliath. Here's Tom Seaver, a Hall of Famer, who has, I believe, 115 acres of prime Napa Valley vineyards out in Calistoga, California, sitting atop of the baseball world. And Jimmy Qualls hasn't been as fortunate. Jimmy Qualls like a lot of people today, had to scrape by just to pay his health insurance premiums. And I thought this was a very, very interesting story on the 40th anniversary of the Imperfect Game. And Seaver wanted nothing to do with this. Through Jay Horowitz, the Mets Vice President of Media Relations, he completely begged off of this story. Jimmy Qualls was only too happy to talk to me. And in one of our conversations, we had about 2 or 3 conversations in June of 2009, he just very casually, very innocently said to me, you know, I've had a nice career in the show, Mr. Gladstone. I wish I had played a little longer. And the only thing I really resent is that I'm not getting a pension. And I said, well, you know, Jimmy, I'm looking over your career totals, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't have the 4 years that you needed at the time to vest. What makes you think you deserve a pension? And he then proceeded to tell me about what happened in 1980. And then he told me about, in 1997, how the Negro Leaguers were awarded their pensions, or their charitable donations, as they're technically called. And I was just outraged. I couldn't believe that this was occurring. And it is occurring to people who I watched growing up, people like David Clyde, people like Jimmy Qualls. I think virtually everyone has probably at one point in time seen the tape of Carlton Fisk waving his arms to guide his home run fair. Well, as I think I already mentioned, the pitcher who served up that ball was Pat Darcy. He's part of this class. And it was just that innocently, Mike. If Jimmy Qualls doesn't tell me that, and in the interest of full disclosure, I happen to work for the New York retirement system, so I know a little bit about vesting. But if Jimmy doesn't tell me that he's not getting a pension, I don't write this book.
Wow, that's amazing. So, hey, before I let you go, the website is A Bitter Cup of Coffee. The publisher is Word Association. ABitterCupOfCoffee.com is the website. Why don't you just let the listeners know anything you'd like to get out there about the book, and maybe anything that you're working on that you want to publicize?
Sure. Well, you're right. You can get it at www.abittercupofcoffee.com. You can order the book through wordassociation.com. You can get it through Amazon.com, Borders.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or you can just call up toll free 1-800-827-7903. That's 1-800-827-7903. That's my publisher's direct number. I think they're running a 10% discount. What I'm working on right now, I mentioned Don DeMola at the outset of our talk. I know about Mr. DeMola because recently I had a conversation with the old Chicago White Sox pitcher, Bob Locker. And Bob Locker has a very cool website for your listeners. It's called thanksmarvin.com. And, of course, Marvin Miller has been passed over not once, not twice, not thrice, but 4 times for induction into the Hall of Fame. Most recently, of course, the vote on December 7, 2009 was not in his favor. And Marvin says he doesn't need the Hall to validate his career. He knows what he's done. He doesn't need a plaque in Cooperstown. But you know what? He deserves a plaque in Cooperstown. And Bob Locker has this very cool website called thanksmarvin.com. And if you're listeners and you want to go to that website, I think they get a kick out of reading all the old-timers who basically say we wouldn't be where we are without Marvin Miller.
Well, I will definitely check it out. And, Doug, listen, great stuff. Always enjoy talking about these kind of issues. Keep us in the loop. And thanks for coming on, and we'll talk again, all right?
Oh, listen, again, Mike, I thank you very much for the opportunity to come on the show. I enjoy coming on the program an awful lot, and by all means, I'd love to come back if if you and your listeners will have me. And again, thank you so